This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Well, luxury European automakers operating in South Korea relent to public pressure, revealing the EV battery makers they use following a car park fire that triggered national panic. Manila set to review its provisional agreement with China for resupply missions at a disputed shoal in the South China Sea amid recent tensions. And 4 fishermen working on Taiwanese boats detained by China for more than a month will be freed today, but the captain and the boat remain in Beijing's custody. And a Japanese executive detained in Myanmar for weeks has been released after being convicted of violating rice pricing rules. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, we take a closer look at one of the so-called ghost train stations in China, a byproduct of the country's rapid expansion of its high-speed rail networks. And as prices go up in Japan, a young man in Tokyo takes to the kitchen to combat his cost of living woes. Authorities in South Korea are moving to calm public safety concerns after a series of fires involving electric vehicles. And Roland Lim is here with the very latest. So, Roland, tell us a little bit more about what sort of actions the authorities are taking.
I'll tell you. South Korean authorities urging automakers operating in the country to identify batteries used in their electric vehicles. Now, some companies have started naming the manufacturers of batteries used in their cars, including Hyundai Motor, Kia Motor and BMW Korea. But experts are questioning how that would improve safety given the lack of definitive data on which battery brands are more prone to fires. Now, public alarm has been growing since a Mercedes-Benz EV caught fire 2 weeks ago, causing extensive damage to an underground parking lot. The blaze damaged about 140 cars and even forced some residents to move to shelters. For more, we're joined by CNA's Lim Yon-suk in Seoul. Yon-suk, good to have you with us. Now, what came out of South Korean officials' latest discussions on EV safety?
Well, not much came out of this meeting this time because the South Korean government says that it will be coming out with more measures sometime early next month. But today's meeting was the second day of this 2-day meeting here in South Korea among officials from various ministries like the Transport Ministry, the Environment Ministry, and others here too. But following that meeting this afternoon, like you said, the government did put out a statement advising the companies here operating in South Korea, and that includes all the foreign car makers here too, to identify the batteries used in their electric vehicles. Because currently they only provide certain kind of information about the vehicles, like the fuel efficiency, and not the name of the battery manufacturers. And that information has become very important here for Korean consumers because of that fire on August 1st. Now, that fire really just ripped through that underground parking lot of an apartment building. And many reports here saying, and although investigations are still underway, it was because of the battery, which was apparently manufactured from China. And that's why you have South Korean companies and also other foreign companies starting to realize that they do have to give the information out as to which company, which country that battery is from. Now, as you said, that fire has really concerned a lot of South Koreans here. And, and reports here also saying, although it's not just a battery and it's also the water sprinkler apparently was not working at that time, but whatever the reasons are, Koreans, especially who own the electric vehicles, are very concerned about, about the future of electric cars here in South Korea.
And Yoon-suk, actually, Roland asked me earlier if I was planning to get an EV, but I was saying, not anytime soon after looking at seeing how the fire has started. But, that's just me. I'm wondering, how has public sentiment toward EVs been impacted by the recent series of accidents that we've seen?
Well, I don't think it's just you. I think that is the kind of sentiment that you see among South Koreans here. There are lots of concerns because electric vehicles have been rather, popular among South Koreans these days. And you also have lots of taxis that have become electric vehicles. And most apartments here in South Korea, especially the new ones that have been recently built, all have these, the chargers installed in the underground parking lots, allowing the owners of those electric vehicles to use them. Now, those owners of the electric vehicles are now facing discrimination following that fire because, like, for example, some of the apartment buildings here are now stopping the electric vehicles from entering the parking lots amid fears from other residents. And there have been reports of quarrels between the management and the residents there. And also some of the public parking lots are also banning electric vehicles from entering. And, citing safety reasons, some ships and boats that travel within the country and allow vehicles to be on board are also banning the electric vehicles. And so, there is a lot of fear going around here in South Korea about the electric vehicles and the danger that they can pose because they've seen that it's not, a danger just to their own car, but also to other cars and also to people around there. And so I think this, this fear among South Koreans is going to stay for a while unless, until they can get to the bottom of this. And also for the South Korean government to announce measures sometime next month as to what they plan to do to ensure that electric vehicles are safe and that South Koreans should continue buying them.
Yoon Suk, thank you for the latest and those insights. That was CNA's very own Lim Yoon Suk reporting live in Seoul. The Pentagon is removing Hesai off a blacklist, according to the Financial Times, as the firm did not meet the criteria for inclusion. The Chinese firm is one of the world's biggest maker of laser sensors for electric vehicles. U.S. companies and individuals are banned from dealing with companies on such lists, or in some cases must seek special permission in advance. The blacklist includes entities which the U.S. government alleges are helping to modernize the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, and fears of a threat to national security. Hesai was added to the list in January, and after its inclusion, the firm sued the Pentagon, calling the move arbitrary and capricious. Washington has been concerned about data collected by onboard computers and sensors on so-called connected vehicles. The Chinese embassy in Washington said it was happy to see the U.S. correct what it called discriminatory process and provide a fair and just environment for Chinese companies. General Motors has reportedly been scaling back its workforce in China as the automaker looks to overhaul its business in the world's biggest auto market. Bloomberg reported that the Detroit automaker is cutting jobs in its sales as well as research and development units in China. It'll also work with local partner SAIC to discuss possible capacity reduction as part of a larger structural reform in the region. Earlier reports suggested that SAIC was planning to slash thousands of jobs this year in its Chinese joint ventures with both GM and Volkswagen. However, SAIC has refuted these claims. Mass layoffs at Chinese automakers are rare for GM. These moves signify a substantial shift in strategy. Like many foreign brands invested in China, the U.S. automaker is navigating a complex landscape shaped by rising tensions between Beijing and Washington. In addition, GM is also grappling with China's weak domestic demand and fierce competition in the auto sector. The challenging environment has contributed to GM's disappointing $104 million loss in the region in the second quarter. Now, still on electric vehicles, global EV sales jumped by a yearly 21% in the month of July, as China recorded its strongest growth this year, despite slumping demand in Europe. Worldwide sales of EVs were at nearly 1.4 million in July, of which almost a million were in China alone. And that marks a 31% jump on year in the world's biggest or second biggest economy. China's and the world's biggest EV maker, that's BYD, reported record sales of plug-in hybrids for the same period. The strong performance comes despite the EU imposing provisional tariffs on imports of electric vehicles made in China. The tariffs do not have much impact on giants like Tesla, which can manufacture outside of China at its Berlin factory, and BYD, whose presence in Europe, though, remains small. Japan's wholesale inflation accelerated in July, data showing the pace of year-on-year growth the fastest in 11 months, as a weak yen pushed up commodity import bills that were already high. The gauge measuring the change in prices of corporate goods rose 3% in July from a year earlier, matching a median market forecast. Inflation data will be scrutinized by the central bank, which raised interest rates 2 weeks ago to levels not seen in 15 years and signaled its readiness to hike borrowing costs further. Now, the yen-based import price index climbed 10.8% in July from a year earlier, up from the revised 10.6% in June, reflecting the yen's weakness and rising raw materials prices. Stock market action now. Asian markets are gaining ground, shaking off last week's losses. Gains led by Japanese equities after a public holiday yesterday. The Nikkei 225 up by more than 3.4%, recovering to levels not seen before last week's big drop. Tech shares such as Tokyo Electron and Advantest are helping the broader index after the sector rose on Wall Street overnight as well. Also helping sentiment is a weaker yen, which is giving a lift to Japanese exporters. The yen is holding steady after weakening 0.4% yesterday. The currency also being closely watched for signs of more unwinding of the so-called yen carry trade. The rest of the region threading higher. The mood was cautious as investors focus on U.S. inflation and retail sales data due out later in the week. The South Korean Taiwan shares managed to stay above water. In Seoul, battery makers extended gains. Now LG Energy Solutions climbing 2% at one point before paring off those gains. And that's all for business at this time. Back to you, Telly.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, the Philippines says that it will review its provisional agreement with China on resupply missions for troops on a disputed shoal in South China Sea. Well, no reason has been given for the review. Well, the country's Foreign Affairs Secretary, however, says that Manila will still honor the provisional understanding and expects China to do the same. The two countries came to an agreement last month following multiple standoffs at the Second Thomas Shoal. Well, meanwhile, a Philippine national security official is calling for an agreement with China to prevent what's deemed as hostile acts over its airspace. Manila has just filed a diplomatic protest with Beijing on actions by the Chinese Air Force over a different disputed shoal last week, which it says endangered the lives of the Philippine crew. A Philippine Navy describes the moves as coercive, aggressive, and deceptive. Manila's Maritime Security Council will meet later this week to discuss the matter. Well, the Chinese military, meantime, defended its actions, saying that the Philippines disrupted its training and accused Manila of illegally intruding into its airspace. Beijing claims almost all of the South China Sea, including parts claimed by the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. A time now for a breather, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China has high-speed railway lines cutting through much of the country. But do you know some stations are actually unused? Well, we speak to our Beijing correspondent who visited one of these so-called ghost stations to find out why. Hello again. Good to have you on East Asia Tonight. Well, China has the world's most extensive high-speed railway network, and it's still growing. But the system has come under scrutiny over dozens of so-called ghost train stations peppered across the country. Well, my colleague Tan Si-hui visits some of these stations in this exclusive CNA report to find out more.
I'm on a journey to learn more about China's high-speed rail transformation. Traveling from the north to the south of China, I took the Beijing-Guangzhou line, also known as the world's longest high-speed railway track spanning nearly 2,300 kilometers. I will also make a pit stop at Zhengzhou city. Today, China's high-speed rail network stands at a staggering 45,000 kilometers, and all it took was 15 years, making it a global leader in high-speed rail infrastructure. Trains on China's high-speed rail network can reach speeds of up to 350 kilometers per hour, making it one of the fastest globally. And as you can tell, we're really going at very high speeds. And that's due to advanced technology, especially on its high-speed rail network, including the Fusing Trail series. And that's the one that we're on right now. And this is my seat, and we'll kick back and relax and keep quiet because we're on the quiet car compartment. There are plans to go even faster next year, with speeds of up to 400 kilometers per hour. With the help of artificial intelligence, the trains can process real-time data and alert operators of any abnormal issues, such as track faults. 3 years ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping lauded the high-speed rail a success of independent innovation. He called for greater development in the transport network to pave the way for Chinese-styled modernization. But it was that same period when China's economy experienced a downturn during the COVID-19 pandemic. New borrowing rules to prevent a housing market bubble from bursting led to a decline in China's real estate market. In turn, this affected other infrastructure projects, including the high-speed rail network, which relied heavily on local government borrowing and subsidies. Then, reports emerged this year that at least 26 high-speed rail stations have not opened, citing reasons such as the station's remote locations and low passenger flow. I made my way to those unused stations in Zhengzhou City, a key transportation hub. Looking out the window, it's a picture of modernity. But as we got closer to Nanchao High-Speed Station, it began to look rather deserted.
This is 1 in 4 high-speed rail train stations that has been left unused in Henan province. And as you can tell, there's not a soul in sight except for these cars parked here. And this entire space takes up about 3,000 square meters. That's about the size of a football field, and it's completely vacant, which is quite a strange sight to behold, especially when we can see around the surrounding areas new buildings.
On closer inspection, a sign showed that the station shut in 2017, only 2 years after it began operation. Inside, it was as if time stood still. And just a 20 minutes drive away, another empty station.
这个现在没开啊？
多久没开了？
不知道。
那你觉得没开会不会影响你生活？因为你不能用吗？
会影响啊，因为有地铁。
Right below the decommissioned high-speed rail is a working metro station, well used in fact. I was perplexed by the amount of idle infrastructure, so I spoke with an analyst to find out more.
For the high-speed railway, it was a poster child for China's infrastructure and the so-called Chinese miracle. It was quite helpful to improve the local economy and improve the welfare of the average person in China. But during the hype of the infrastructure spending, almost every single county was planning to get connected in this high-speed railway network, which was clearly way above what the market can sustain. So as a result, now we're looking at a lot of the wasted investment.
China's State Railway Group is the state-owned operator that runs the rail network. Its total liabilities reached more than $800 billion at the end of 2021.
As we can see, that most high-speed railway do not make any money in China. So they, as long as they operate, they have to rely on the fiscal support. What has to happen is that the government do a calculation about the social benefits along with the asset return. So we cannot just see the money return when it comes to this kind of infrastructure. Then they could have a more reasonable decision about what the next step should be.
Analysts say the key is to shut down all unproductive stations while maintaining the rest. They believe there is still a lot of potential in the use of high-speed railways and how it can revive the local and regional economy. As I continue my journey down south to Guangzhou City, I arrive at Baiyun Railway Station. It's newly renovated and serves as one of the key transport projects in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area. The total economic output of the Greater Bay Area last year exceeded 14 trillion yuan, or close to $2 trillion, contributing to about a ninth of China's total GDP.
This 100-year-old station is a piece of modern architecture and nothing I've ever seen before in China's railway stations. And it's said to be a super station, and it's 3 times larger than its neighboring Guangzhou South Railway Station. And so it truly is a hallmark of China's pursuit of continuously developing its railway network.
China goes full speed ahead in expanding its railway network, aiming to put on track 70,000 kilometers of high-speed lines by 2035. And the Belt and Road Initiative continues to pour billions of dollars into railway projects, connecting the country to Southeast Asian nations like Laos and Thailand.
And CNA's Tan Suhui, she joins us now live from Beijing. Well, Suhui, I have to say that was a pretty epic journey traveling from the north to south of China. But I have to say, looking at your story, those empty stations, they're massive. They look kind of creepy, kind of spooky. I mean, what was it like? I mean, could you just walk in there, freely?
I think the way you described it was exactly what I thought. When I went there by a car, because it was impossible to get there by train, and so we had to book on the transportation app a car to take us there. And once we got there, it was very quiet, and there was a massive space for at least the first station that we went to. It was completely empty and vacant, and so it was just me and my cameraman. We walked towards the train station hoping to go in, but of course, when we were there, right at the doors, it was padlocked and we just could not go in. So what we did was to peer in, and what you saw earlier was exactly what we saw. It was like security scanners all there. The escalators were also there. There were toilets. So the infrastructure was perfect. It was right there. It almost felt like we were on a set of a movie film. And there were posters as well all over. They were telling the entrance, the exit. But of course, the poster that hung outside, that was clearly showing how it has been decommissioned and it was previously working about 2 years in 2015, and then it shut in 2017. And then when we walked outside, it was also another spectacle because we saw the high-speed rails coming to the stations, but they did not stop. They just went straight ahead, passing the stations. And also we saw trash strewn all over, and so it really felt quite surreal to be in such a place, because I could never imagine seeing such a place in other places. And when we feel that we felt alone, but actually we were being watched by someone, because as we were filming at the station, we were approached by a man on a scooter. He came over to us and he asked us what we were doing, and we were saying that we were filming the station. He said that he identified himself as a railway staff member, and he said that as long as you're not, interrupting any kind of operations at the railway station, which and we said we were not doing anything suspicious. We were just mainly focusing on the train stations as well as the passing trains. And that's when he really left us. But we saw that he kept a close eye on us. So he was whizzing by and watching us. But we felt that, we're done with the station. We have a long journey ahead. We're just going to take that and leave. And so we went to the other stations after that. But he left us alone.
I guess that was a really spooky bit, right? Having actually somebody watching over your shoulder, watching your every move. But I think it's also not a bad idea. It's possible that they could be, turning those ghost stations into a movie set. So perhaps a thought there. But what about the other people that you spoke to in that vicinity? I mean, how did they feel about these neighborhood ghost stations?
When we were at the stations, we actually went to 3 stations. The first 2 stations, we found nobody except the train staff members. So the third one, we finally found people because there were residential blocks there, offices there. And so finally, we managed to meet some people. We asked them, do you know what's happening with these train stations? In fact, they told me that it's been there unused. They didn't even know that they were open previously. So I had to tell them that they were previously open before. And so they were all very surprised and shocked. But they did say that they feel that it was a waste of space if it's not going to open. So they are still hoping that it would open eventually someday. But in the meantime, they actually say that they have scooters, they have cars, they don't really need this high-speed station. So clearly, without the footfall, these stations are likely going to stay vacant for the next couple of years.
So I really appreciate the week-long effort covering this story. Thanks so very much, CNA's Tan Suhui in Beijing. Coming up on East Asia tonight, we turn our focus to Japan to find out how this Tokyo man is actually using bento box economics to fight inflation. Automakers operating in South Korea relent to public pressure, revealing the EV battery makers they use following a car park fire that triggered national panic. Manila set to review its provisional agreement with China for resupply missions at a disputed shoal in the South China Sea. This follows an increase in confrontations in the waterway and in the skies above. 4 fishermen working on a Taiwanese boat detained by China for more than a month, freed today. The captain and the boat remain in Beijing's custody. After nearly 30 years of deflation, the prices of things in Japan are going up, and consumers are scrambling to stretch their hard-earned yen. Well, CNA's Money Mind, in an earlier episode, talked to a young man in Tokyo who's tackling the cost of living crisis by making bentos.
Kento Ohama is fighting inflation one meal at a time. With prices going up and wages not keeping up with inflation, it was getting harder for him to balance his budget. The 32-year-old thought about getting a second job, but he found a solution in his kitchen.
前の仕事は不定期だったんですけど、転職して土日休みになって生活のコントロールがしやすいと。で、副業しようって考えた時に、副業よりも自炊をして食費を減らした方がコストパフォーマンスいいなっていうふうに思いまして。
Kenta lives alone in a one-room apartment in Tokyo's Meguro district. Rent is his biggest expense, about 70,000 yen or around $450. His next biggest expense is food.
一食外食したら1000円前後するんですけど、コンビニの弁当でも600円ぐらい。自分でお弁当作ったら300円前後で収まりますので、経済的にはメリットを感じますね。ちょっと珍しいかもしれないですけど、僕はお昼の分と夕方の分と2個お弁当を毎日持ってってますね。
The cost to him? 2 hours every weekend preparing meals for the week ahead.
Food account for 30% of ordinary Japanese consumers' annual spending. So it's very important. So, I think it's because food is rising at a rate of like 4 to 5%. People feel high inflation, more than what statistics is suggesting.
Kenta visits the supermarket near his home for his weekly grocery run.
玉ねぎ、えのき、パプリカ、小さな野菜、それぞれ高くなっているというふうに思いますね。玉ねぎは118円で1つ。よくやっぱり玉ねぎって普段よりよく使うことが多いので高くなったという印象は受けやすいです。
25 years of deflation in Japan have come to an end. In December 2023, inflation hit 4%, the highest in over 40 years.
So food account for half of this total inflation. So right now, our inflation is 2.8%. 50% of inflation comes from only food. In the case of Japan, population is dropping, this market size is shrinking, so there is no strong demand growth. So most of this inflation is coming from cost push, right? So it's more painful.
To add to the pain, wages in Japan are not keeping pace with rising prices. In February, real wages fell for the 23rd month in a row.
Last year, the large companies and the labor union had a very high wage settlement, so which was 3.6%. Okay, that is the highest in 30 years. But when you look at the actual wage growth, it was only 1.3%. So actually, if you look at the young people's opinion survey, half of the people said they never felt the wage went up. And actually, another 20% said their wages went down.
Inflationary pressure is also being exerted by a weak Japanese yen. The yen recently hit its weakest level against the US dollar since 1990. For now, with wages still not keeping pace with inflation, young people like Kenta have to hustle to balance their budgets. Kenta's Bento Box project started as a trial 2 months ago. It's cut his food bill in half. So will he carry on cooking?
栄養バランスよしコストよしだと思ってたんですけど、弱点は自分の料理がまずいってことですね。
それはでも改善の余地あるんじゃ
伸びしろしかない。
And for more, we are joined by Naohiro Yashiro in Tokyo. He's a specially appointed professor of global business at Showa Women's University. Well, thanks for joining us on the bulletin, Professor. So we've seen some of the measures that some people are taking to make ends meet, like Kenta there in that story. So, Professor, how do you think the average person is going to be affected by this inflation? And isn't it a big problem when salaries aren't keeping pace?
Yes, it's a big problem, particularly for those lower income people, young men, as indicated. So the government is raised the minimum wages several times, and I think it's rather effective to help the low income people.
So, Professor, you've mentioned that low-income households, young people, they are some of the group that's hit hardest by this inflation. And you've mentioned that the government has also raised minimum wages several times. But what more can the government do to help this current situation?
Well, the government should do is try to lower the inflation. And that's one of the reasons why recently Bank of Japan raised interest rate. That is to lower that is to avoid further lowering of the yen.
Right.
And that's
yeah, please go ahead, Professor.
Yes, so I think to avoid further deceleration of the yen, and at the same time try to raise the wage rate. That's quite important to save the people of the low-income families.
Right. And big picture-wise, how do you think inflation is going to impact Japan's economic growth? Are we looking at some serious long-term consequences if that is not being addressed?
Yes, it depends on the type of inflation. As indicated, current Japan's inflation is rather cost push, mainly by the imported goods. So we try to change it to more like a demand pull type of inflation with more active economic growth. That's a quite important one.
Yeah, so when we talk about monetary policy, like tweaking interest rates, for instance, does it really make a dent in inflation? And if there are any risks to that approach?
Yes, that's why Bank of Japan have kept the inflation interest rate quite low, but it's too much. So, and it has more negative impact by lowering the yen. So simply, Bank of Japan changed the policy and try to stimulate the economy rather than keeping the yen low for a long time. Yes.
Professor, I've also been reading in reports that a fair number of young Japanese workers, they're heading abroad for better pay. And just to give our viewers an example, a Japanese can actually be making 3 times more slaughtering lamb in Australia than he would if he worked in Japan's military. So, I mean, that is a serious issue, isn't it? When you have brain drain, you have a declining population, an aging population.
Well, I don't think so, because it's good for young people to go abroad and look at different cultures. And actually, they are not immigrating out of Japan. They are coming back. So that's quite okay. But I'm not comfortable with the fact that they are going abroad just for making money. That's not desirable things.
So that lies in the problem that a good number of them, maybe not Kenta in that story, but they're going there, for instance, to seek a better pay and perhaps bring that money back. So what do you think individuals themselves, trying to navigate these rising prices and a weaker yen, how can they protect their purchasing power, stretch their dollar?
Well, the better way is to try to get higher education and try to get a better job with higher pay. And currently, the Japanese labor market is trying to be mobilized, and so that they have a better chance to find a good job. And the government try to support it.
Right. And also, Professor, I mean, do you see this being a long-term problem or just sort of like a mid-term problem?
It's a mid-term problem because major factor for the Japanese economy is that we cannot grow fast as it used to be. So try to stimulate the investment of the company, or try to invite more investment from abroad, including Singapore. That's quite important policy for Japan.
Right. And how are they doing on that front, though?
Well, try to deregulate the unnecessary regulations. We have so many regulations, particularly in the agriculture or service sectors, and that's quite important.
All right. Well, many thanks for your time and thoughts. Naohiro Yashiro, a specially appointed professor of global business at Showa Women's University. And of course, you can also catch the full Money Mind episode on CNA.Asia or on YouTube. Turning our attention to China now, another kind of inflation is in focus, and that's of the dowry, or the so-called bride price, a traditional payment from the family of the groom to the brides. Now, dowries are said to have gone up sharply in the past 15 years. According to a Nikkei report, the dowry these days often goes upwards of $20,000. Well, that's more than a year's salary for an average city worker. The average in 2007 was between $1,000 and $3,000. Rising costs are said to be driving the surge, and not helping the situation is a relatively high gender imbalance across parts of the country, which makes finding a partner all the more challenging for some. Well, the report also said that officials in Henan province have even visited homes of single men and women, urging them to say no to high bride prices. China has released 4 of 5 crew members of a Taiwanese fishing vessel who were detained early last month. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Commission says the repatriated crew include 1 Taiwanese and 3 Indonesian nationals. A 5th crew member, reportedly the captain, is still in Beijing's custody. The boat and crew were detained by the Chinese Coast Guard last month for allegedly using trawl nets and breaking summer fishing rules. Well, this development comes after recent efforts by Beijing and Taipei to resolve months of disputes over fishing. 2 mainland Chinese fishermen died after their boat capsized during a chase by the Taiwanese Coast Guard. It took more than 5 months for the 2 sides to reach a deal before the men's remains were returned home in July. Japan has confirmed Myanmar's release of one of its nationals from detention. Well, this comes after media reported the release of a manager working for a local unit of supermarket giant Aeon. Hiroshi Kasamatsu, the Japanese Aeon manager, was sentenced by a Myanmar court to a year in prison just yesterday. The Japanese Foreign Ministry did not elaborate what led to the man's release right after his sentencing. He was arrested last month for allegedly selling rice at prices well above officially regulated ones. Aeon Orange runs a few supermarkets in Yangon, the commercial hub of Myanmar. 3 other Myanmar nationals detained with Kasamatsu are working for local retail companies. Officials did not say if the 3 had also been released or are still under detention. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Japan braces for a second storm in days, with tropical storm Ampil set to intensify the typhoon strength as it churns towards Tokyo. The number of deaths in Japan linked to the Benji Koji Red Yeast health supplement has been revised upwards. Kobayashi Pharmaceutical says 11 more fatalities should have been reported to Japan's health ministry, on top of the dozens of other deaths the company had previously identified. Well, that's according to a GG News report citing a company announcement. Last month, the Japanese pharmaceutical company claimed it was investigating some 80 deaths potentially linked to its pills. The GG report adds that when taking subsequent investigations into account, the number of victims would exceed 100. The scandal erupted in March when the company recalled 3 brands of dietary supplements after customers complained of kidney problems. It later said it had detected a potentially toxic acid produced by the mold at one of its factories. Well, the company reportedly began to receive details of kidney problems from doctors between mid-January and early February. But a product recall was not issued right away. President Akihiro Kobayashi and Chairman Kazumasa Kobayashi have since left their original posts after expressing their intention to take responsibility for the harm caused. Along the weather front, Japan looks set to face its second storm in days, with the tropical storm Ampil now churning in the Philippine Sea and is forecast to track northwards in the coming days. It's packing winds of more than 60 kilometers per hour, and it is expected to rapidly strengthen into a typhoon as it brushes past Tokyo this weekend before weakening as it tracks northeast. And due to the nature of forecasting, it's unclear this moment if it will make landfall. Meantime, Maria, which slammed into northern Japan as a severe tropical storm, has now weakened into a tropical depression over the Sea of Japan after lashing the region for the past 2 days. Authorities have cautioned residents to remain watchful for risks of flooding and mudslides as more rain is expected from the storm's remnants. Flights and rail services in parts of the country have earlier been affected, disrupting travel plans. Now, one of the 2 runways at Japan's Narita airport was closed today after an American cargo plane made an emergency landing. The Atlas Air Boeing 747 was bound for Los Angeles, but an issue with its hydraulic system forced it to turn back to Narita. None of the 7 crew were injured, but the tires were found ruptured and the wheels damaged. The runway was closed for at least 7 hours, but the impact on other flights was said to be minimal. Now, a similar incident happened on Monday when a brake glitch on a Singapore Airlines plane forced a runway closure. South Korea has engaged the services of a cuddly helper to prevent a certain insect from hitchhiking into the country as its Olympics delegation returned from the Paris Games. And that is Seiko, Seoul's first bedbug sniffing beagle that is reported for duty at the country's main Incheon International Airport. Well, the 2-year-old is the first and so far only dog that's trained to detect the odor of pheromones. Well, these are chemicals released by bedbugs. Well, Seiko's nose is so sensitive that it has a 95% accuracy rate. Seiko, however, isn't born with the ability. It has to be honed, and that's through the collaboration between South Korea's Ministries of Security and Transportation, health officials, and pest control company, SESCO. Last year, authorities in Paris reported a bedbug scare, a problem which was also of pressing concern in South Korea. Now, reports of suspected infestations at Korean apartments, motel rooms, and traditional spas known as jjimjilbang prompted a widespread disinfection campaign. Well, Seiko and his team has been deployed since Friday with the aim to intercept these tiny critters. They'll continue to work right through to September the 8th. This is also another story that we've been tracking. U.S. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump's virtual interview with billionaire Elon Musk on his social media platform X got off to a pretty rocky start. A glitch kept users from accessing the live stream for more than half an hour. Well, Mr. Musk says that X suffered a massive cyber attack. The Tesla CEO has thrown his weight and his wealth behind Mr. Trump after a gunman tried to assassinate the former president at a rally last month. The conversation between the two men comes as a Republican leader's Democratic rival, Kamala Harris, has been riding a wave of momentum in U.S. media. Mr. Musk doubled down on his endorsement of Mr. Trump as he wrapped up the 2-hour chat, calling on voters to back the former president's campaign. Nick Harper has the story.
There was plenty here in this 2-hour conversation between the two of them. And I use that word because that is the word that Elon Musk used, conversation. He said this wasn't an interview, and it certainly didn't prove to be. There were no probing questions, rather really an opportunity to let Donald Trump speak about the type of things that Donald Trump likes to speak about. Many of the stump speech topics, the problems that he feels are besetting America. And many of those things were things that Elon Musk agreed with. They align on many of the same ideological ideals. Immigration was a theme that Donald Trump returned to many times over, warning that as many as 60 million people from around the world would enter the US illegally if the Democrats were to win in November, claiming that those were people that were being broken out of jails and sent to the US. Those are the type of unfounded claims that he makes during rallies, and during the course of this conversation, Elon Musk didn't push back on any of those assertions. We also heard about foreign policy. He was speaking about Joe Biden, blaming him for the war in Ukraine, suggesting that Vladimir Putin never would have dared to invade Ukraine if Trump was still president. He spent about 25 minutes speaking about his attempted assassination. Elon Musk said that he had shown strength under fire and that it was inspiring. Kamala Harris's momentum in recent week very much capturing fundraising dollars. So Donald Trump knows that he needs that, and all of that at a time when he is now trailing her in the polls. Just a few weeks ago, it was Biden who was trailing Trump. Now Trump is trailing Harris, and importantly in swing states. So I think this was a chance for him to get out there, to create headlines. The big problem is now, though, that many of those headlines are instead being dominated not by what was in that conversation, but rather the technical problems that it faced.
On to space exploration, and scientists say they've found evidence of a reservoir of water beneath the surface of the red planet. First of its kind discovery. Well, this is the first time liquid has been found on Mars, advancing the search for life there and showing what might have happened to the planet's ancient oceans. Well, the findings come from a new analysis of data from NASA's InSight lander, which touched down in 2018. But scientists say the liquid water is buried deep underground in cracks up to 20 kilometers under the planet's surface. Water is considered essential for life, and geological studies show the planet's surface had lakes, rivers, and oceans more than 3 billion years ago. Researchers add that the findings paved the way for future study into Mars' habitability and the search for life somewhere besides Earth. All right, time to wrap up East Asia Tonight this Tuesday. Headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.